The unseen danger. The galaxy was calm, far from the chaos that sometimes ruled the outer sectors. A small, isolated system near the edge of known space lay untouched by the galaxy's larger conflicts. The planets there were quiet, and their inhabitants lived peaceful lives, far from the wars that raged elsewhere. However, that peace was about to be shattered. In the heart of the Galactic Command Center, a small, blinking light suddenly turned red. It was a warning, one that many ignored in their routine duties. But this time, it wasn't a drill. It was something far more serious. Lieutenant Commander Jason Waverly was sitting at his desk, monitoring routine transmissions from various sectors. He had heard stories of distant threats, rumors of giant fleets approaching, but he never thought it would affect him. He was far from the front lines, stationed at a quiet outpost. But today, everything changed. His screen blinked urgently as a message appeared, marked with a red exclamation point. Unidentified fleet approaching at high speed. Coordinates: Sector 217. Immediate attention required. Jason's fingers hovered over the keyboard as he scanned the message. His eyes narrowed when he saw the fleet's size. "Impossible," he muttered. He quickly cross-referenced the coordinates with the galaxy map, and a chill ran down his spine. The fleet was heading directly for Earth. "That can't be right," he whispered. He knew that Earth had always been protected, hidden away from the most dangerous parts of the galaxy. But this was different. The Deathworlders, their very name sent shivers through his mind. These were the warriors from the deadliest planets, creatures of pure strength, ruthless and relentless. No one had ever seen them approach this close to a peaceful world. Jason immediately transmitted the signal to his superior officer, Admiral Terra Mendoza. He typed as quickly as he could, his mind racing. "Admiral, I've just received an alert. A massive fleet is moving at breakneck speed toward Earth. It's them, the Deathworlders." The seconds felt like hours as he awaited a response. Finally, Admiral Mendoza's voice crackled through the comm channel. "Understood, Commander. Prepare to relay that message to the Galactic Council. Make sure they know the severity of this threat. We cannot ignore it any longer." Jason's heart pounded in his chest as he sent the message, his hands trembling slightly. He had never been so close to a real crisis. The Deathworlders were infamous. Their fleets were unmatched, and their warriors were brutal. If they were headed for Earth, things were about to change drastically. As Jason continued to monitor the situation, the numbers on his screen kept rising. The fleet wasn't just large, it was enormous. Hundreds, maybe thousands of ships, all closing in on Earth. No one had expected this. No one had anticipated that the peaceful edge of the galaxy could be reached by these merciless invaders. He couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The fleet was not just moving fast, it was intentional. It wasn't a random attack or an accidental course change. They were coming for a reason, and Jason feared that reason might be far worse than anyone could imagine. Jason quickly turned to his communications officer. "Get me a direct line to the Council. Now." His voice was sharp, filled with urgency. The officer scrambled to establish the connection, but Jason could see the same fear mirrored in the officer's eyes. This wasn't a drill. This wasn't a test. This was real. The connection finally buzzed to life, and Jason's screen flickered as the face of the Galactic Council appeared, their expressions grim. "Commander Waverly, report." The voice of General Rhodes came through first. His face was tired, as if he had seen too many battles and faced too many threats. But Jason could see that even he was taken aback by the news. Jason swallowed hard. "General, I have confirmed that the Deathworlder fleet is on its way. They are moving faster than any fleet we've encountered before, and they are heading straight for Earth." The council members were silent for a long moment, the weight of the news settling on them. Finally, General Rhodes spoke again, his tone cold. "Is this a joke, Commander?" "No, sir," Jason replied firmly. "I've analyzed the data myself. It's real. They're coming, and they are coming fast. We need to prepare for a full-scale defense. They won't stop unless we do something about it." The room was filled with murmurs. Jason knew this was only the beginning of something far larger than they had ever imagined. The Deathworlders had always been a distant threat, something they never thought would impact the more peaceful sectors. But this was different. The warning had come too late. Admiral Mendoza's voice came through the comms again. "Commander, we need you to begin preparations immediately. Alert the fleet, begin lockdown procedures, and prepare Earth's defenses. The Deathworlders are ruthless. They'll tear through anything in their path unless we act quickly. I want Earth's ships ready to launch as soon as possible." Jason nodded, even though he knew the odds. Earth's fleet had been dormant for far too long. The ships were old, their technology outdated compared to what the Deathworlders would bring to the table. But it was all they had. "We don't have much time," Jason said. He quickly turned back to his console and began the preparations. The countdown had already begun. Outside the Galactic Command Center, the stars in the sky began to darken. Earth had no idea what was coming. But Jason did. The question wasn't whether Earth could survive. It was whether humanity could even fight back. The sense of urgency in the Galactic Command Center was palpable. Commander Jason Waverly's mind raced as he and his team scrambled to prepare for the incoming storm. The Deathworlder fleet was no longer just a distant threat. They were real, and they were on their way. His heart pounded with each passing second as the countdown to the fleet's arrival drew closer. He couldn't shake the feeling that Earth was on the verge of an unimaginable nightmare. The comms were flooded with updates, warnings from various sectors. Earth's military command was rushing to prepare the planetary defenses. The older warships, relics of a time long past, were being restored to life in desperate attempts to bolster Earth's defenses. But it was clear to Jason that these old ships were far from a match for the oncoming fleet. Their weapons were outdated, and their shields were weak compared to the high-tech, formidable weapons of the Deathworlders. "We're not ready," Jason muttered to himself. His fingers flew across the console as he sent out distress signals, hoping for reinforcements from neighboring sectors. He needed help. They needed help. As the hours ticked down, the fleet's approach became clearer. The Deathworlders weren't just any invaders. They were an ancient, savage species from one of the deadliest planets in the galaxy. Their very name struck terror into the hearts of many. Their warriors were ruthless, each one trained to survive in the most brutal conditions imaginable. They were a force of nature, unstoppable, relentless, and unforgiving. And now, they were coming for Earth. Jason knew that the Deathworlders didn't just conquer, they obliterated. Their fleets were designed for maximum destruction, capable of annihilating entire planets in a matter of hours. He could only imagine what would happen if they reached Earth. The message from Earth's highest command was clear: prepare for a full-scale invasion. They had no idea just how bad it would be, but they knew it was coming. Meanwhile, in the Galactic Command Center, the tension was rising. General Rhodes and Admiral Mendoza were constantly in communication, working with Jason and his team to coordinate the defense. They had sent out every available fleet ship they had, older models, upgraded with whatever technology they could salvage. But Jason was aware that time was against them. Suddenly, the message that had come through only hours before, the one that Jason had dismissed as a glitch, now rang true. A civilian transmission came through, loud and clear, as a voice on the other end spoke with urgency. The fleet is much bigger than anticipated. They've already destroyed an entire colony in the Outer Rim. There are survivors, but they're running out of time. Earth is next. Jason's heart sank. This wasn't a drill. This wasn't a false alarm. The Deathworlders were moving faster than anyone had ever predicted. Earth's defenses were barely holding up, and it would only be a matter of time before they were overrun. "Commander," Admiral Mendoza's voice echoed in his ear. "We need to act now. Earth cannot fall. You need to rally our forces and prepare the ancient fleet. Whatever you have, We need it in the fight. Time is running out. Jason didn't hesitate. He turned to his tactical officer, Lieutenant Kara Hale, who was monitoring the fleet's progress. Lieutenant, update me. What's the status of the fleet? Lieutenant Hale's face was grave as she turned toward him. The Deathworlders have entered our system. They're at the outer edges of Earth's orbit. Estimated time of arrival: 1 hour. Jason's eyes widened. The countdown had begun. He knew they were outmatched. The Deathworlders were known for their devastating war tactics, using sheer force to crush everything in their path. They didn't negotiate. They didn't surrender. They just destroyed. We've got to hold them off, no matter what, Jason said firmly, though doubt gnawed at him. What could Earth's forces possibly do against this kind of overwhelming power? We're not ready, Kara said quietly, her voice betraying the fear she was trying to mask. Our fleet's not equipped to handle them. They're too advanced, Commander. We need something bigger. Jason felt his chest tighten as he turned to his old mentor, Admiral Mendoza. She was known for her strategic genius, her calm under pressure, but even she looked unsure now. I know, Jason, she said softly, her voice steady despite the situation. But this is Earth's fight. We've been at peace for too long. It's time to show the galaxy what humanity can do. Just then, Jason's screen flickered. The comms officer had received a signal from Earth's outer defense station. The message was short but urgent. The Deathworlder fleet is advancing. We cannot hold them off much longer. Please advise. Jason's mind raced. They were out of time. He had one option left. He quickly activated the backup transmission line to the ancient fleet, ships that had been dormant for centuries. They were old, outdated, but they were Earth's last hope. Activate the ancient fleet, he ordered. Get every available ship ready to launch. The room fell silent as everyone stared at their consoles, waiting. Would the old fleet be enough to stop the most dangerous fleet the galaxy had ever seen? Jason didn't know, but he had no choice. Earth's survival was in his hands. Minutes ticked by, feeling like hours. He could hear the distant hum of engines starting up. The ancient ships were awakening. As Jason stared out the window, he caught sight of the stars growing darker. The Deathworlders were almost here. It was no longer just about defending Earth. It was about surviving the rampage that was about to unfold. The Deathworlder fleet had arrived at the outskirts of Earth's orbit, their massive ships looming like shadows against the backdrop of the stars. The calm of space was broken by the deafening roar of engines as the Earth's fleet, both ancient and newly revitalized, slowly began to take formation. The fleet, though smaller, braced itself for the inevitable clash. But no one was ready for what came next. Commander Jason Wyverly stood at the front of the command center, his knuckles white as he gripped the console. He could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him, but he couldn't afford to show fear. The time for hesitation was over. It was time to fight. The Deathworlders have breached the first defensive line. Lieutenant Kara Hale's voice cut through the tense silence. Their weapons are already active. They're targeting our primary defense stations. Jason's heart skipped a beat. The Deathworlders weren't just here to conquer. They were here to obliterate. And from the looks of it, they were starting with Earth's key defenses. The first strike was incoming, and it was a powerful one. Raise shields. All ships, prepare for battle. Jason barked, his voice steady despite the turmoil within. Activate weapon systems on all ships. We fight back, no matter what. The command center erupted into action as officers scrambled to execute his orders. On the main screen, Jason saw the incoming waves of Deathworlder ships, their weapons charging up with blinding intensity. The once peaceful skies of Earth had become a war zone. From Earth's ancient fleet, ships long thought to be nothing more than relics of the past, began to power up. The ancient vessels, though older and slower, carried with them centuries of forgotten technology. These ships were Earth's last line of defense, their cannons aimed at the encroaching enemy. As the battle began, The first shots were fired, sending shockwaves through the command center. The sky above Earth lit up with violent flashes of energy as the two fleets collided. The Deathworlders, with their advanced weapons and unrelenting ferocity, were a sight to behold. Their ships were monstrous, massive, and heavily armed, almost overwhelming in their power. But the ancient fleet was no slouch. Though their technology wasn't as advanced, the humans piloting the ships were experienced and determined. For them, Earth's survival meant everything. Commander Waverly's eyes remained locked on the battle unfolding on the view screen. "Report," he shouted as the chaos raged on. "Multiple ships damaged," Kara shouted back, her voice urgent. "But we've taken out 2 of their forward vessels. The fleet is holding, but we're taking heavy losses." Jason clenched his jaw. The first wave was always the hardest. His mind raced, trying to think of a strategy to turn the tide in Earth's favor. "We need to disrupt their formation," he said, his voice determined. "Lieutenant Hale, coordinate with the fleet's command ships. We need to get in close and take out their flagship." Kara nodded, immediately relaying the orders. Every second felt like an eternity, and Jason knew that Earth's forces couldn't hold out much longer. The Deathworlders were relentless. Every strike was calculated and brutal. But Jason had seen human resilience in action before, and he wasn't about to give up now. The battle raged on, with explosions lighting up the dark void of space. The Deathworlders were relentless, pushing forward with no mercy. But Earth's fleet wasn't backing down. Even as the Deathworlder ships fired their devastating weapons, Earth's ships fought with everything they had. The ancient fleet, despite its age, had a certain advantage: the element of surprise. The Deathworlders hadn't expected this. The old ship's unpredictable maneuvers and strategic tactics threw the enemy off guard. On the ground, Earth's population watched the battle unfold in real time. News feeds streamed live, showing the devastation in space. People held their breath, praying for a miracle, for humanity's last hope to survive this onslaught. Every broadcast was filled with fear, uncertainty, and hope all at once. Back in the command center, Jason was becoming increasingly aware of how fragile their position was. Each blast sent waves of pressure through the ship, rattling him to his core. But he couldn't afford to show fear. Not now. Not when Earth's future was at stake. "Enemy flagship is entering firing range." Kara's voice rang out again. "We need to hit it now, or we'll lose our chance." Jason didn't hesitate. "Target their engines. If we can disable their ability to move, we can gain an advantage." He watched as Earth's ships lined up, aiming all their firepower at the Deathworlder flagship. It was the only way to give Earth's forces a fighting chance. They needed to take out the heart of the fleet. If they could do that, the Deathworlders would falter. For what felt like an eternity, the ships fired relentlessly. The energy beams collided with the Deathworlder flagship, sparking massive explosions. The flagship shuddered, its shield flickering under the assault. But despite the damage, it didn't go down. "Come on," Jason whispered, gripping the console tighter. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the flagship's shields broke. The Deathworlder's mighty vessel was vulnerable. The humans had done it. The first major victory in this battle was theirs. But it wasn't over yet. "We've got them," Kara exclaimed. "The flagship is down, but there's still the rest of the fleet to deal with." Jason nodded grimly. They had taken a step forward, but the war was far from over. The Deathworlders would regroup. They always did. The battle for Earth had only just begun, and the cost would be great. The deafening roar of weapons fire echoed through the command center, and Commander Jason Waverly's eyes remained locked on the screen, tracking the movements of the Deathworlder fleet. The initial success of knocking out the enemy flagship felt like a distant memory. The battle had only intensified since then, and Earth's fleet was now facing the full force of the Deathworlder's wrath. "Status update," Jason barked, his voice barely audible over the noise of the chaotic command center. The hum of the engines reverberated through the walls, and the crew was working at a frenzied pace. The silence that followed his command was deafening. The officers were all busy, but the tension in the air was palpable. Kara Hale's voice broke through the stillness. "We've lost 4 more ships, Commander. The Deathworlders are relentless. They've shifted tactics. They're no longer focused on just our defenses. They're targeting our reactors." Jason's stomach twisted in a knot. If the Deathworlders got to Earth's reactors, the damage would be catastrophic. He needed to think quickly. If Earth's fleet fell apart now, humanity's hope would be shattered. But if they could withstand the assault long enough, they might be able to mount a real counterattack. He couldn't afford to lose any more ships. "Pull all remaining ships into a defensive formation. Protect the reactors at all costs," Jason ordered. But the Deathworlders weren't giving up easily. A new wave of enemy ships broke through Earth's defenses, their weapons firing with deadly precision. Every second that passed, Earth's fleet was pushed back. The old ships, once relics of a forgotten age, were showing their age. They were slow, their weapons less advanced than the Deathworlders' state-of-the-art technology, but their sheer unpredictability kept the enemy guessing. Jason watched as another volley of fire erupted from the Deathworlder ships, tearing into one of Earth's ships. The vessel shuddered as explosions rocked its hull, sending shockwaves through the space around it. The crew on board could only watch as their ship was destroyed. It was a heartbreaking sight, but Jason didn't have the luxury of mourning. "We need reinforcements now," Kara shouted as the battle intensified. The lights above flickered, and alarms blared across the ship. Jason took a deep breath and scanned the tactical map on the screen. The Deathworlders' numbers were growing. Their flagship, though damaged, was still operating and issuing commands. But the Earth fleet had something the enemy didn't: humanity's stubbornness. As long as there were still humans alive to fight, they would fight. "Are there any reserve ships left?" Jason asked, trying to keep his voice calm. He wasn't sure if there were any more reserves. Most of the fleet's ships had already been mobilized. "There's one. An old battleship from the early 21st century. It was meant for storage, but it's fully functional," Kara responded. Jason's heart skipped a beat. An old battleship. It wasn't much, but it might be just the edge they needed. Earth's ancient fleet had already taken the Deathworlders by surprise once. Could it do it again? "Bring it online. Fast," Jason ordered, "and get me a line to the rest of the fleet." In the depths of space, the ancient battleship began to power up. The lights on board flickered to life as the aging engines roared to life, pushing the massive vessel forward. It wasn't as fast as the newer ships, but it was heavily armed. More importantly, it had something the Deathworlders wouldn't expect: an aggressive captain determined to defend Earth at all costs. "Commander, the battleship is en route," Kara said, her voice steady. "We've also got backup from the colonies. They're rallying to our side." Jason's eyes narrowed. It was a glimmer of hope, but it wasn't enough yet. They had to hold on. They had to keep fighting. "Get the battleship to the front lines. We need a distraction. Let's draw their fire away from our reactors," Jason ordered, "and make sure the colonies know we're counting on them." The massive battleship rumbled forward, cutting through the empty vastness of space. The Deathworlders' fleet paid little attention to the old ship, thinking it was no threat, but they would soon learn otherwise. Suddenly, a new wave of fire erupted from the Deathworlders, targeting Earth's last line of defense: the reactors. Jason's heart raced as he watched the screen. The reactor shields were beginning to fail. It wouldn't be long before the Deathworlders reached their target. "Hold the line," Jason shouted, desperately. But just as it seemed Earth's defenses were about to break, the old battleship appeared. Its weapons blazed to life, firing upon the Deathworlder fleet with unrelenting force. The massive cannons cut through the space like a knife, targeting the Deathworlder ships with deadly accuracy. The Deathworlders, caught off guard, quickly shifted their focus to the new threat. But by then, it was too late. The old battleship had given Earth's fleet the chance they needed. They fired everything they had, launching missile after missile, and taking down the first wave of Deathworlder ships that had been relentlessly targeting the reactors. Jason exhaled in relief, but the battle was far from over. The Deathworlders might have been temporarily stalled, but they would soon adapt. Earth's fleet had won a brief respite, but only a brief one. "We've bought ourselves some time," Jason said, his voice hardening. "Now we make them regret underestimating us." The tide had turned, but the war was still raging, and Jason knew this was only the beginning. The space around Earth's fleet had become a chaotic battleground. Explosions lit up the void like stars flickering out of existence. Ships from both sides collided, twisted, and burned. The Deathworlder fleet, massive and brutal, continued its relentless advance, but for the first time, they were forced to slow down. The appearance of the ancient battleship, once considered a relic, had given humanity a small window of hope. Commander Jason Waverly stared at the tactical map, his fingers tapping nervously on the console. Earth's fleet was struggling. The battle was teetering on the edge of disaster, but he refused to give in. They couldn't afford to lose now. Too many lives were at stake. "Commander, we've got a problem." Kara Hale's voice broke through his thoughts. "The Deathworlders have concentrated their firepower on our rear flank. They're isolating our defensive ships, cutting off reinforcements. We're surrounded." Jason's heart sank. Their defensive lines were being shredded. If the Deathworlders broke through this last barrier, they would have clear access to Earth's colonies, to its cities, and to the heart of humanity's defenses. He couldn't let that happen. "Deploy all remaining ships to the rear," Jason ordered, a surge of adrenaline filling his veins. "We have to hold them off long enough to call in backup from the colonies. We can't let them break through." "Understood, Commander," Kara replied. Jason's eyes flickered back to the screen. The Deathworlder ships, with their advanced weaponry and tactics, were relentless. They seemed to anticipate every move Earth's fleet made. Their precision was uncanny, their ships closing in faster than ever before. Earth's fleet had already suffered heavy losses, but this was the last stand. If they fell here, humanity would be lost. The ancient battleship, Earth's wild card, was still holding its ground, but the ship was battered. Its weapons had begun to overheat from constant use, and its shields were starting to flicker. It was no longer as effective as it had been in the opening moments of the fight. But Jason had no choice. It had to stay in the fight. "Deploy fighters to assist the battleship," Jason commanded, as the fleet was further pushed back by the Deathworlders' superior numbers. "All ships, prepare for the final engagement." The fighter pilots took to the skies, zooming out of the carriers and heading straight into the heat of battle. Their smaller, more nimble ships darted between enemy fire, engaging the Deathworlders in dogfights above Earth's crippled fleet. But despite their speed and maneuverability, they were no match for the Deathworlders' raw power. One by one, the fighters were destroyed, falling to the same fate as the massive ships before them. Jason's stomach twisted as another wave of fighters was lost. It seemed like there was no way out. "We need something more," Kara said, her voice grim. "We can't just keep sending our ships to their deaths. We need a decisive strike." Jason thought fast. There was only one option left. It was risky, it was insane, but it might just be the thing to turn the tide. He turned to Kara. "I'm launching the last assault. We're going all in." Kara's eyes widened. "Commander, it's too dangerous. The fleet's already spread thin." Jason's jaw tightened. "I don't care. Earth's future is on the line. We'll strike at their core, hit them where it hurts the most. If we can take out their flagship, we'll cripple them." Kara nodded slowly. "Understood." Jason stood from his chair, eyes still locked on the screen. The Deathworlder's flagship was the heart of their operation. It was heavily guarded, and its advanced weapon systems made it near invulnerable. But if they could break through its defenses, the Deathworlders would be thrown into chaos. Their fleet would lose direction, and Earth's fleet would have a chance. "Prepare the final strike force," Jason ordered, his voice cold and determined. "Everyone else, provide cover." The final assault was a desperate push, with Earth's remaining ships rushing forward, using every trick in the book to break through the enemy lines. The ancient battleship, battered and near destroyed, led the charge, its weapons firing relentlessly at the Deathworlder fleet. The remaining fighters followed suit, diving into the heart of the enemy formation. The fighters' cannons fired in rapid succession, creating an opening in the Deathworlder's defense. As Earth's fleet pushed forward, Jason's heart raced. The distance between them and the Deathworlder flagship closed with terrifying speed. His ships were taking hits, one by one. They were falling, but they were still alive. And alive meant they could still fight. Suddenly, Jason saw it. A gap in the defenses. It was small, barely noticeable, but it was enough. The Deathworlder flagship was exposed. "Now," Jason shouted. The fleet launched everything they had left at the Deathworlder flagship. Missiles, torpedoes, and laser beams rained down upon the flagship's exposed hull. The Deathworlder flagship retaliated with devastating firepower, but it was too late. Earth's fleet had overwhelmed its defenses. Jason could feel the impact in his chest as the flagship began to break apart, its central core starting to destabilize. A massive explosion ripped through space as the flagship was torn to pieces, and the Deathworlder fleet was thrown into disarray. With their command ship lost, the Deathworlder forces faltered. Ships veered off course, some of them retreating, others still attacking aimlessly. Jason allowed himself a breath of relief, but he knew the battle wasn't over yet. The Deathworlders would regroup, and they would come again. Earth had won a momentary victory, but the war was far from finished. "Hold the line," Jason shouted. "This isn't over. We fight until the last." The last stand had given humanity a glimmer of hope, but there was still much more to do. The Deathworlders were not finished, and neither was humanity. This was only the beginning. The remnants of Earth's fleet drifted through the void, battered and broken, their ships limping back to the safety of Earth's orbit. The destruction of the Deathworlder flagship had caused a ripple effect, throwing the Deathworlder forces into confusion. The remaining enemy ships were scattered, some retreating, while others attempted to regroup. But for the first time in days, Earth had something to celebrate, a fleeting but hard-won victory. Commander Jason Waverly stood on the bridge of the command ship, his gaze fixed on the massive screen showing the aftermath of the battle. The stars beyond were now littered with the wreckage of both fleets. A somber silence hung in the air, broken only by the low hum of the ship's systems. "We did it," Kara Hale said quietly as she stepped up beside Jason. Her voice lacked the usual energy, replaced by a weariness that came from fighting a battle they almost didn't win. Jason nodded slowly, though he felt no triumph in his heart. The Deathworlders were formidable, and even though their flagship had been destroyed, the war was far from over. The fleet that had been the backbone of their invasion was still massive, and they would surely return. What they had done today was a delay, not a decisive victory. "I don't feel like celebrating," Jason replied, his voice tired but firm. "We've lost too much, too many good people." The loss of their ships, their comrades, the fighters who had given everything for this victory, it all weighed heavily on him. The battlefield was silent now, but Jason knew that the calm would not last long. The Deathworlders would rebuild, rearm, and prepare for another assault. And next time, they would be even more dangerous. "Command ship reports that we've sustained heavy damage," Kara said, breaking his train of thought. "We can't remain out here for much longer. We need to return to Earth and regroup." Jason sighed, rubbing his temples as he fought off the exhaustion that threatened to consume him. They had lost a large portion of their fleet, but they had also damaged the heart of the Deathworlder forces. It was a small victory, but it might be the opening humanity needed to strike back harder. They couldn't afford to waste time. "Set course for Earth," he ordered. "We'll assess the damage and begin rebuilding. But we need to be ready for what comes next. I have a feeling the Deathworlders won't be gone for long." Kara nodded. "Understood, Commander." As the fleet limped back toward Earth, Jason couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Even now, in their moment of partial victory, the Deathworlders were never far behind. Jason knew that humanity had just entered a new phase of the war. The Deathworlders were relentless, and their fleet was vast. Back on Earth, the people were still reeling from the devastating news. Though the Deathworlders had been temporarily halted, their intentions were clear. They would not stop until Earth was theirs. And even if humanity had survived this battle, Jason knew that the real fight was only beginning. The journey back to Earth took longer than expected. With their fleet barely holding together, Jason's crew was forced to ration what little resources remained. Earth's shipyards, capable of repairing and rebuilding, were their only hope. Jason kept his eyes on the horizon, determined to face whatever came next. Reports from the colonies were troubling. Some colonies had already been overtaken by Deathworlder forces. Though the fleet had succeeded in delaying their plans, it was evident that the Deathworlders had made major strides in their invasion. The relief of victory felt hollow. The war was far from over. "We need a strategy, Jason," Kara said one evening as they watched Earth grow larger on the view screen. "We can't just keep surviving battles like this. We need a long-term plan." Jason sighed, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. The fleet had been battered, but it was still alive. They had ancient warships and new technologies, advantages that could turn the tide in future battles. But he knew that if humanity was to truly stand a chance, they needed more. More firepower, more allies, and most importantly, more time. "We'll need to fortify our defenses, rebuild our fleets, and secure the colonies," Jason said, his mind racing. "And I have a feeling that we'll need to find some way to counter the Deathworlders' overwhelming numbers. This isn't just a war for survival. It's a war for humanity's future." Kara nodded, understanding the gravity of what he was saying. The war was about more than just victory now. It was about ensuring that humanity's place in the galaxy would not be erased by these merciless invaders. As Earth's fleet entered the atmosphere, the feeling of relief was palpable but short-lived. The battle had been won, but it had come at a cost. Humanity had managed to fend off the Deathworlder fleet temporarily, but they knew better than to believe the fight was over. The scars from the battle, visible on every ship, were reminders that the war was far from won. Jason Waverly stood at the command deck, watching Earth below. The once peaceful blue planet now looked like a war zone from the skies. The damage done by the Deathworlders was extensive, and the ground forces were still scrambling to rebuild what had been lost. The invasion had only just begun, and humanity was about to face the full force of a ruthless enemy. "We've made it back," Kara Hale said, her voice steady but tinged with exhaustion. "But it feels like we're walking into the lion's den." Jason nodded silently. The fleet was battered, but they still had their will, their resolve. That was something the Deathworlders couldn't take from them. They were still human, relentless, tough, and unwilling to give up. "Commander," a voice interrupted his thoughts. It was the communications officer, a young officer named Lieutenant Markov. "We've just received a transmission from the colonies. It's urgent." Jason turned, walking over to the communications console. The urgency in Markov's voice was enough to make his stomach tighten. Whatever the message was, it couldn't be good. The Deathworlders hadn't stopped. He knew that much. "Patch it through," Jason ordered. The screen flickered for a moment before a grainy image appeared. It was a video feed from one of Earth's distant colonies, barely hanging on after the first wave of Deathworlder attacks. The voice that came through was strained, the speaker out of breath, but the message was clear. "Commander Waverly," the officer on the screen said, a colonel from one of the distant outposts. "We have bad news. The Deathworlder fleet is regrouping. They've received reinforcements, and they're coming for us. This isn't a skirmish anymore. They've launched a full-scale assault. If we don't get help, we're going to lose everything. Jason's heart sank. Reinforcements. The Deathworlders were regrouping, and they weren't just sending a few ships this time. They were coming in full force. Earth had managed to halt them temporarily, but that moment of reprieve was over. The Deathworlders had realized the threat humanity posed, and they were preparing for the final strike. How long until they arrive? Jason asked, his voice calm despite the storm building in his chest. At their current speed, they'll be here in less than a week, the colonel replied. Our defenses are already compromised. We're trying to hold on, but we don't know how much longer we can last. Jason stood still for a long moment, processing the information. A week. That was all they had. His mind raced. They couldn't just sit and wait for the Deathworlders to arrive. They needed to act, and they needed to act fast. We'll mobilize the fleet, Jason said, his voice firm and determined. Get word to all the colonies. We'll defend Earth, and we'll strike back hard. This time, we fight on our terms. Kara stepped up beside him, her expression resolute. We've lost so much already. We can't lose again. Jason's eyes narrowed. He had no illusions. The battle they were preparing for would be brutal. But humanity had come this far. They had been on the edge of extinction once before, and they had fought back. Now, they would do it again. Only this time, they would take the fight to the Deathworlders. Prepare the fleet for a counteroffensive, Jason ordered. Get our best commanders in the room. We're going to make sure the Deathworlders regret ever underestimating us. As Jason stood at the helm of Earth's defense, every nerve in his body was on high alert. He could sense the pressure mounting, not just on him, but on all of humanity. Every day, every hour, every second counted now. The Deathworlders were coming, and they were coming for everything. Commander, Kara said, breaking his thoughts once again. We have an opportunity here. The Deathworlders have regrouped, but they still haven't realized how much power we've gained in this short amount of time. We can hit them hard before they even know what hit them. Jason nodded. This was the strategy humanity had always relied on. Strike hard, strike fast, and leave no room for hesitation. But there was something else driving him, something more than just strategy. Humanity had fought for survival before, and now they were fighting for the future of their species. We'll hit them before they can regroup, Jason said. And this time, we make sure they know that Earth isn't to be messed with. The countdown had begun. The Deathworlders were coming, and Earth's warriors were preparing for the storm. It was a battle unlike any other, and humanity's fate hung in the balance.